The signing of a piece of paper at City Hall 75 years ago today brought to an end 6 years of conflict in the Asian region, a conflict that consumed populations, changed borders, and saw the end of empires and birth of nations. A conflict that reshaped the region, heralded the end of the colonial era, and created the basis of a region that today prospers and is in many respects the economic engine of the globe. For Australia, when Singapore fell in 1942, almost 15,000 troops were taken prisoner and sent to camps around Singapore, notably Changi, Great World, Havelock Road, Lornie Road, Serangoon Road, to name a few places that now conjure up images of post-war prosperity and urban development rather than conflict and suffering. Through the war, this number diminished as prisoners were sent to the Thai-Burma Railway and other places in the region. By the end of the war, approximately 5,000 remained concentrated mainly in Changi. The images of these men remained fixed in the Australian psyche and annals of war. Images of suffering and sacrifice, but also of enduring loyalty and mateship. Today we commemorate the end of this tragic conflict. We remember the sacrifices, personal and national, made throughout the fighting. And as we lay our wreaths at Kranji, standing silently amongst the fallen, we can only imagine that each person buried there had a family, friends and colleagues that continued on without them, bearing the personal impact of the clash of great powers. These reflections on loss and sacrifice are important for all of us, lest we forget.
September 12, 1945 marked the official end of the Second World War for Singapore. Today, we honor the service and sacrifice of military members who defended this island and its people, and all those who suffered as prisoners of war and internees during the Japanese occupation. Today is also a chance for us to honor the memory of military forces that fought bravely for peace in Southeast Asia during World War II, and to reflect on the horrible costs of war, the tragic loss of life, the injuries, the broken families, the lost hopes and dreams. For Canadians, there are 199 names of our armed forces inscribed on the Singaporean Memorial to commemorate those who have no known grave, and an additional 3 tombstones of Royal Canadian Air Force members buried in the Kranji War Cemetery. On this day of remembrance, we shall never forget the 8,000 Canadians who served in Southeast Asia during World War II, 454 of whom did not return home. Lest we forget.
As we gather today for a solemn ceremony to mark the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, we remember with deep reverence the supreme sacrifices of fallen heroes and their epic tales of bravery. I am also reminded of the grave personal grief of the family members of the soldiers and the immeasurable costs that these battles imposed on humanity at large. While I do recognize the huge contribution of my fellow countrymen in this theatre as part of the then British Indian Army, today is also a day to reflect on the lessons drawn from our shared history and pledge our collective wisdom towards making this planet a better place to cohabit for our future generations. My prayers for brighter days ahead for all of us. Namaste.
E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā karangaranga tēnā koutou. During the Second World War, around 140,000 New Zealanders served on land, at sea and in the air throughout Europe, the Middle East and the Asia Pacific. Hundreds of thousands more contributed to the war effort on the home front. In September 1945, many New Zealanders were still serving in the Asia Pacific region, a theatre of conflict that resulted in immense suffering and loss of life. At the time, New Zealand Prime Minister Peter Fraser stated, "We must see to it that the new world is based on social justice and human rights, and that they have not died in vain." These words ring true today as we face another global challenge, this time in the form of a pandemic that prevents us from gathering together as we normally would at Kranji War Memorial to commemorate both the end of the war and the subsequent building of strong and unshakable diplomatic ties with the region. Nevertheless, today we together reflect on the sacrifice of our servicemen and women who served in the Second World War. We remember those who endured the terrible trials of battle and imprisonment, and we honour those who gave their lives in order to secure our freedom. Ka maumahara tonu tātou ki a rātou. We will remember them.
Since arriving in Singapore as British High Commissioner, I have visited the Singapore Memorial at Kranji on a number of occasions. Each time I stand before the memorial, I'm moved and humbled as I reflect on the immense sacrifice and suffering of the men and women of the Commonwealth forces who are remembered there. The Japanese surrender in Singapore on the 12th of September 1945 is regarded as the final act of the war in the East, and for Singapore, the end of an occupation filled with hardship. Freedom had been won, but at a heavy price paid by many. Those who died and suffered were more than soldiers. They were also civilians. They were sons and daughters, fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, kin and friends. Each and every year, and on this 75th anniversary, we thank and honour those who fought for our freedom. We do so for their sake and the sake of their families and descendants, but also for our own understanding. On the memorial of the 2nd British Division in the cemetery of Kohima in northeast India, an epitaph attributed to English classicist John Maxwell Edmonds reads, "When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today." These words speak of the debt of gratitude we owe to those who gave up their years and lives for our today. We will remember them.
75 years ago today, peace returned to Singapore and the world. While many reflected on the cost of war and the pain suffered, for many Asian countries, it was also a time to look forward with hope to a new world of freedom, equality, and independence. Like a phoenix, Asia literally rose from the ashes of war. It has modern metropolises, major economic powers, and a new standing in the world. However, memories of war still bedevil international relations, particularly in Northeast Asia. The Commemoration Committee for the Second World War, comprising Australia, Britain, Canada, India, Japan, New Zealand, and with Singaporean representatives, has held several remembrances ceremonies for the fall of Singapore and the end of war in Singapore. The aim of this committee is to focus on reconciliation and peace, and demonstrate an example of how remembrance ceremonies can be a positive force to heal the wounds of war and forge new bonds of friendship. I thank the High Commissioners from the Commonwealth and the Embassy of Japan for their significant work in the committee in ensuring that future generations remember the sacrifices of the past. I thank also the Japanese School Singapore and the Japanese community for their contributions in this year's observances. Lest we forget.